Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Hangout on air. Wow, no, that's not the show. Let's back that up. Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Wow, screwed the pooch of the first second.
That's only been like 3 years ago.
Wow. God, the brain does weird things. Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today online at Roll20.net. Follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Drop by the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Like, subscribe, share, tell a friend. And we're also on iTunes. Do the same under the same moniker, itunes.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Tonight, we continued the discussion started last week about the basics of the rules with Savage Worlds in anticipation for the unveiling of Black. We're going to go through and do a course on the most basic of basic rules in Savage Worlds. So now we are doing this as part 2. Last week, we covered things like the wound mechanic, shaken, combat, as well as range combat. And tonight we're going to dig a little bit deeper into some more advanced rules, but are still basic rules that you really need to understand how they work. Here to discuss it, Dave, the rules Maven Scott. Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
And we lost the 5-star review because you messed up the intro.
That's right. Hashtag not today, Satan. Shame. And Dustin, the Zealot Smith, the Savage Zealot Smith.
Baskin Robbins don't play.
So last time we left it off, we were I think we ended the discussion basically on the range combat front, talking about range combat cover, why it's good to take prone in some positions and not in others. In case you missed that episode, melee is not the time to go laying on the ground. When people are shooting at you, that's the time to go lay on the ground. And also, too, if you're watching the live stream and want to participate in the chat, feel free to do so. We will bring that into the show.
Wait. Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. So if somebody's standing over you with like a
battle axe,
bat or a battle axe, you don't want to fall down and go in the fetal position?
Right. No, I mean, well, you can. I mean, if it's a smarts trick, if you want to play that off as a smarts trick.
No one is saying you don't want to do these things.
We're saying it's a bad idea.
From a rules mechanic standpoint, it is
that'd be a bad idea.
Ages to you to do so.
So let's talk about some of the more overlooked. I want to kind of go middle of the road before we start talking about more advanced things like dramatic tasks or chases, social conflicts, things of that nature. Let's talk about gravity in Savage Worlds. So I want to make sure that we talk about this because I think it's quite often overlooked. There is falling damage and there's falling mechanics in Savage Worlds. The basic says every 10 feet you fall or every story, you suffer 1d6 plus 1 damage when you hit the ground. That doesn't mean if you fall down a flight of stairs, you figure out how many 10 feet rung of stair there is and roll 1d6. There's a thing in Savage Worlds that allows you to do this thing called bumps and bruises. And it doesn't cause a wound. It causes fatigue that lasts and hangs around for 24 hours. So if you fall down the side of a steep cliff and roll, go ahead and just take a level of fatigue. As a GM, feel free to go, hey, you take a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises because ouch. You don't have to fall off a horse and get dead.
and as a player, I would say that if your GM says take a level of fatigue for bumps and bruises, then say yes, GM, by all means, because the GM could in turn go, oh well, let's see, you just went down a 50-foot slide down a cliff, so you're going to take 5d6 wounds and maybe get a case of dead. So your GM is actually kind of being a little easier on you by saying, hey, take a level of fatigue, take bumps and bruises, you take a -1 to everything. That's kind of how I see it. So don't look at it and go, oh my God, I have to take bumps and bruises. Take your bumps and bruises and be happy.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the situation, bumps and bruises can sometimes be worse than falling damage. You know, you roll a fistful of 1s and you got a decent toughness or that ability to drop a Benny and soak it, you could fall 5 stories and take no damage in Savage Worlds. It can happen.
Right, that's true.
It can also happen that you could literally fall 4 feet and have your character break their neck on something that was apparently laying there that causes the die to explode multiple times, causing several wounds. I mean, we've actually had this happen in one of our games where someone was running through a field, tripped over a stone, and broke their neck, immediately dead.
Yeah, I let me. Do you care if I'm gonna pull a jib? I can tell you a quick gravity story. So playing Rippers, and they're on top of this tower, and they're I don't remember exactly what they were doing, but one of the players decides he's gonna go. He sees a coil of rope, so he grabs the rope and he jumps over the side of the tower. And I said, "Did you make sure the rope was attached to anything?" He didn't. I said, "Well, give me a high or low," and he gave me the opposite. And I said, "So as you jump off, the coil of rope just uncoils, and you smack into the ground." And I rolled the damage. He ended up soaking it. The next character tied off a rope, tried climbing down the tower, screwed up his roll. I think he crit failed it. I rolled damage, and it killed him.
Yep.
He was using a tied-on rope, and the other guy who just jumped off and went flying managed somehow to survive it. Well, Savage Worlds happens. We say that all the time.
Here's the thing that's overlooked with fatigue versus a wound. So with the wound, you have the ability, like Dave said, to soak, or somebody with the healing skill can heal up that wound, and you don't have the -1 penalty. With fatigue, sorry, unless you have magic succor, you're holding on to that -1 to all trait rolls for another 24 hours.
I mean, let's take that. Look at that. You can't even use the healing skill to get rid of it. Whereas with a wound, you absolutely can. Just pull out your first aid kit, have the character spend 10 minutes, make a healing roll, and get rid of that wound. With fatigue, there is no non-magical cure for fatigue in the rules using just the healing skill. Now, some setting might let you do it, especially in a more modern setting where they have smelling salts or something that they have wave under.
Drink a 5-hour energy.
But 5-hour energy, whatever, your individual setting might have. But in core, there's not really a way to do that outside of wait for that to go away. And that's there by design. One of the things I think is very interesting about that, though, is bumps and bruises is not restricted just to the falling scenario.
Right.
Bumps and bruises, as we talked about, I think, a little bit at the end of the last episode, can also just be inserted by the GM as the cost of failure in some situations, where you might have a character who's trying to do some complex or rigorous task, and they fail the roll. They still completed whatever the task was, but they pick up a level of bumps and bruises as the fatigue of what they had just tried to do. Strained muscles, overexertion, whatever the narrative that you wrap around that is. Fatigue and in the form of that bumps and bruises that goes away under a specific amount of time is a great way to handle, oh, look, you failed to do X. Bumps and bruises, but the task is completed.
Right.
It's kind of the failing upward mentality. If you've played in a lot of the other games that take that method, bumps and bruises is a way to allow the player to fail while still achieving something.
Right. It's non-binary success in some cases, yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to very specifically point out, this does not mean you give the player the option to either fail or succeed with a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises. That's more the fail-forward mechanic you see in other games. Here, this is, as a GM, it's your job to interpret those dice rolls, and it's absolutely an option you have is to have that result come up as a bumps and bruises roll for the failure. Though typically, I would say you want to kind of give the player an idea of what the cost of failure is, so that they know whether or not they should spend that Benny. If you get a player who's going to throw their bennies away on something, when in all reality they're going to succeed even with a failure, you really owe it to the player to make sure they were aware of that beforehand.
Right. I think the example we've used in the past is a Wild West game where you're riding a horse shot next to the train and you're trying to board the train and you leap from your saddle onto a ladder. Okay, give me an agility check and a -1 because it's a moving train, a moving horse, and jump. If you succeed the agility check, you climb the ladder and you're on top, no problem. If you don't, you suffer a level of bumps and bruises from hitting it wrong and struggling to get up that ladder, and you have a level of fatigue for 24 hours. I think that's like one of the examples we've used in the past.
That's a great example.
It is.
And the critical failure is you watch your horse and the train disappear into the distance as you're dicking the dirt flat on your face.
Right.
No, that's the point where
falling damage possibly.
That's the point where you have to wait for the ranger to like turn around and pick you up, and in that gruff Texan accent say, "What were you doing?"
Yeah, your entire posse shouts that boy ain't right in the head, and they double back for you and do that arm lift back onto the back of their saddle. Yeah,
right.
So okay, so and here's the other thing too. I want to kind of touch on this a little bit tonight because it's one of those more intangible parts of the rule set that really isn't spelled out for you as a GM or a player in this game, and that's the Benny economy. And things like having fatigue taxes the Benny economy.
Right.
Things like having wounds taxes the Benny economy. Combat and soaking taxes the Benny economy. So
I think it's pretty obvious when it comes to things like soaking how much it does. But with fatigue, the part of this that Jared talking about as a tax is quite literally that's now a penalty to every dice roll you make the rest of the session until that fatigue is removed from the character. Therefore, it's a lot more likely you're going to have to spend a Benny for that reroll just to succeed at the cool stuff you're trying to have your character do.
Right. And it almost makes having a level of fatigue along with wounds when you're incapacitated bumps that negative from a 3 on that vigor roll and incapacitation up to a -4 or maybe even a -5 if you have 2. So understand handing out fatigue is a great way to go, oh, okay, you don't have a wound, but that lingers. It has a lingering effect on the game that you may not be cognizant of as a newbie when you're first doing it. It seems like, oh, well, big deal, -1. That's better than a wound. Yeah, in some cases, maybe not, depending on what happens.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it all depends. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
So let's talk about real quickly. I just want to touch on some of the maneuvers. I don't want to get too deep in the woods on the minutia and the details of maneuvers. But I would just say this: understand that as a GM, you really want to take a look at the maneuvers section when it comes to things like push, especially, and understand that it's a very generic, abstract mechanic. The end result is the other character is either prone or moves 1d, like 6 inches in game terms, or 1 inch in game terms, 6 feet in real world terms, back in some direction. So we've used this as an example before. Well, where are the rules for picking somebody up and throwing them? It's push. Yep. Essentially, at the end of the day, it's push. You're making it opposed strength rolls to begin with. That's you lifting them up and throwing them on the ground. You still get the same effect as if you walk up and push somebody into the street or back in a barroom brawl. It has the same effect.
Another great example of this is, somebody says they want to trip somebody or they want to sweep the leg out from under somebody. All of those are basically the same mechanic. All of them are push. All of them result in, okay, and you choose to have the character be knocked prone. It's one maneuver to kind of do a lot of different things. And I think when you start realizing how much of Savage Worlds is built around that abstraction, and you start realizing things like, fighting is fighting, well, knocking someone prone is knocking someone prone regardless of how you did it. It doesn't matter if you're doing it by picking the guy up and throwing him down on the ground in a body slam from WWE, or if you're doing it by, kicking his knees out from under him, if you're doing it by catching him behind the feet with a cane or something. Regardless of how you're getting that person on the ground, it all is the same mechanic. And once, as a GM, you start recognizing that, you really can start seeing the real plethora of things that are available, all based on the very small list of maneuvers that are there.
Right. I also want to say, too, I think one of the most overlooked ones as well is jump. It gets overlooked a lot. People go, "Oh, give me an agility roll to get across the chasm." No, there's an actual mechanic for jump, and what it basically tells you is from a dead stop you can, and this is very generous, by the way, from a dead stop you can horizontally go up 1 inch. And so in game terms, you can stand there and basically dunk on people all day long because you could leap 6 feet straight up in the air from where you're standing, according to the game rules. If you have a little bit of a run and go, you do it at the end of a movement, it's good for 2 inches. And run and go isn't technically you running. It's I'm doing this at the end of movement is my final movement. But either way it goes, a successful strength roll grants 1 extra inch of distance. So if you're going to have somebody cross a chasm, go, okay, give it a run and go. And then at the very last minute, give me a strength roll to see if you get that extra inch, extra 6 feet that you need to get across the chasm. So I think jump is often overlooked as a rules basic that I don't think most GMs are aware of or even use in the game. So I wanted to bring that up as well. As far as any other maneuvers, I would say this is more of the advanced thing. We've talked about this before. The outcome and effect of an agility trick or smarts trick doesn't have to be combat. Doesn't have to be a multi-action combat scene. And the one we've used over and over again, it works because it's very clear for everybody to understand, is the Wiggyism from Tales from the Pit of, hey, an ogre's got my comrade at the end of a hall in a dungeon. I'm going to run towards him, run up the wall, do a backflip, and as I slide over, I'm going to drag my dagger across his forehead, and the effect is I want blood to trickle in his eyes and temporarily blind him, so he drops the thing. The outcome of that is you want the opponent to be shaken. Just do that as one agility trick. You're not trying to do a wound. You're trying to cause a shaken effect. So do that as an agility trick. And you achieve the outcome of what you're describing without, okay, well, give me a -2 to the climb roll, agility roll to go up the side of the wall, and then another -2 for an attack, and then blah, blah. Instead of figuring all that out, it's just not necessary. Because at the end of the day, it's an agility trick, and you're trying to shake your opponent or gain an advantage from them being temporarily blinded by blood in their eyes or whatever.
Yeah. I think going back to what Dave said, like one of the important things is to just think in terms of concept, not in terms of everything being a mechanic. Like that's the idea of this is something that is related. Like you don't have to have a mechanic for every single thing that happens. And I think that's where people are getting hung up. It's like, well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dustin.
I'm sorry, I missed it. What were we saying?
I was saying, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, like, I've looked at some systems and they have this whole idea of there has to be a mechanic for every single thing that happens. And in Savage Worlds, it's okay, let's sort of have that abstract that the basic concept of the abstract applies in a lot of different ways. Like if I say 1/2 + 2, what am I talking about?
In Savage Worlds terms, you're talking about toughness or parry.
Toughness, parry. What if I'm talking about sanity?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that would be something from the horror companion. So,
or wealth. If you're looking at one of the wealth systems that's out there,
yeah,
in Nemesis or whatever it's called.
And that's what I'm talking about. It's like that whole idea of just like you don't have to constantly have a new mechanic for every single thing that happens. You just have to have the idea of how it works. The universe is like that. Like we've just got the basic laws of physics. You just got like the basic laws of physics that make things work.
what I was going to say to kind of tack onto that is that Savage Worlds basically has this entire section called situational rules. And if you actually look at that list, there's about 32 or 33 options in that list. It takes 6 pages. It is the most rules-heavy section of the book. Through 6 pages, it's 33 different situational rules mechanics that you can apply to handle damn near anything that comes up in your game. From knocking someone prone, to someone being shot through a door, to what happens when you try to knock the sword out of somebody's hand, to how do you shoot somebody in a specific location. I mean, all the things that can come up are basically handled in this 6-page section of the book. It's very concise, it's very quick, and it's because each one of them has a multiple use abstraction. And it's the core of the way Savage Worlds is constructed, and it is the hardest thing to wrap your head around as a new GM to Savage Worlds.
Right.
The understanding not just the trapping side of it, which I think is more what Dustin's touching on, which is, you know, I can take this one mechanic and call it 3 different things, as much as I can take this one mechanic and apply it as the same mechanic without even renaming it to multiple situations of the game, because they all have the same mechanical effect regardless of the way the narrative around them is described.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to say this. I want to say this too. I think one of the most overlooked things that people don't consider as GMs is unstable platform. Anything you're doing on a moving ship, you should be subtracting 2 from it. And I would say this specifically because there's an edge involved that eliminates that rule. And if one of your characters has taken that, then they deserve to get it.
Right.
I would also say to unarmed defender and improvisational weapons rules are vastly overlooked and hand waved.
Oh yeah,
in the game.
One of the things I think that's interesting about that is each one of those have situational modifiers on them. Things like, you know, whether or not you get an unstable platform when just running and trying to do something. You know, it's not just a case of, oh, well, you're going to take the multi-action penalty. No, because you're running, you've created your own unstable platform in some situations. You know, things like that become very important in the minutia of your narrative, but the game only treats it as the exact same rule you would face for something else, because mechanically it has that same effect.
Right. Right.
Now,
So
Ruben asks an interesting question. He asks about crouching.
Mm-hmm.
So what are people's thoughts on crouching?
Isn't it in there somewhere?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it's in the... Let me break out the holy text.
'Cause I believe, at least from my experience, most players use crouching at least slightly wrong. Most players are trying to use crouch as a way to get a steadier firing platform for their weapon, since that's, you know, one of those things that actually gets taught to anyone who's ever fired a rifle, is that if you crouch down, you've got a more stable base to fire from. So I hear a lot of people say, I take a knee and fire my weapon. It's like, that doesn't do anything in the game. That's actually the aim maneuver, which would mean you're going to fire on the ground.
Yeah, no, here's what crouching does for you. It reduces half pace, but gives you light cover against ranged weapons. That's all it does. Yeah. -1 against ranged attacks if you're crouched and moving, but you only move half your pace, including if you're running. Yeah.
Versus going prone, where I believe
subtracts
it gives you a higher cover, but doesn't it reduce the pace to 1 inch regardless?
Yeah, if you're crawling. Mm-hmm. And you also have to take two of your pace to stand as well. To get up off the ground.
Up from the ground. I'm looking here to see.
Getting up costs 2 inches, and then Let's see. Character may fall prone.
No, it doesn't have any rules on moving while prone. So yeah, it looks like under the rules, you really can't move while prone if you're actually using that mechanic. So you get a player who wants to get down and crawl on the ground, that's going to be crouching. It's not going to be prone from a mechanics standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Because there's no way you're going to let anybody actually move at their pace while prone.
No.
Don't
even
try
it. And if your players try that, just say no.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always just said you can move up to 1 inch. 6 feet is about how far you can do that alligator crawl thing, Anything more than that, you're exposing yourself more than laying prone allows. But yeah, the rules actually don't allow for any movement while prone.
Right.
Yep.
Your parry is reduced by 2, and you must subtract 2 from your fighting rolls.
And if they're within 3 inches for a ranged attack, they ignore the cover bonus that you were receiving.
Yep.
That is actually being very generous, because unless you know how to fight from the ground, you're pretty screwed.
Just lay on your back and kick your hands and flail your arms. Or kick your feet, I mean.
Well, and it makes sense too, right? Because the whole point of you going prone is not to be a combatant; it's to get cover.
Right. Yeah, it's to not get shot.
Right.
I'm looking at the quick attack option summary on page 77, and I am not seeing crouched.
It's because it's under pace. It's under a different section. It's not considered a situational. It's part of pace.
Gotcha.
No, Primus is saying
it's actually listed under movement.
Okay, movement.
Yeah, on page 65 of the PDF.
Yeah, Mel Primus was just actually talking about that, and he says that it's 2 inches of movement allowed while prone. That it's considered crawling, and that you do gain the benefits of prone. So okay. I mean, there is still some movement, but yeah, I mean, you are definitely having some trade-offs. But again, it's all about situational awareness, and it is beyond a doubt something that you really need to stop and consider, because it is so easy to look at this mechanic and go, oh, well, if I've got a character who's moving through chest-deep water, they're prone, they have 2 inches of movement because they're fighting against that slog of the water, and they're that hard to hit from range because there's only this much of them that's exposed. That is a very quick and dirty way to handle something that the rules just don't have anything for. There's nothing in the game that talks about what it's like to move through chest-deep water.
Mm-hmm. Which it kind of makes sense that you would have to that you would go that crouch route, is because, I mean, you're not swimming at that point, and your pace is reduced. Another option is you could say it's difficult ground. Even if it's water, it's still difficult.
Yeah, it's muddy. You could be that way. Yeah.
And herein lies the other part of this that makes that abstraction so difficult, is because there are these, we'll say 32 rules, situational rules in Savage Worlds, it's up to you as a GM to apply the one that best fits the situation. That's the other reason there's not a hard and fast rule for anything, is PEG has decided long ago that the best person to decide what rule to use in the moment at the table is the GM. They don't think they know how to play the game better than you do. Therefore, here's a group of rules. Choose the one that works best in your situation.
Right, and here's the thing to remember. I want to kind of drive this spike into the railroad as well. Improvisational fighting. So the next time you're in a bar fight, and one of your characters goes, I pick up a chair, and I hit him with it. Okay. -1 to fighting and parry when you do that. Because it's not intended to be used as a weapon. It's unwieldy. You're trying to use something that's meant for you to put your ass in as a club. And then it's very... I really admire the improvised weapon rule, because it's very, very basic and succinct. It's just, hey... if you're going to throw it, a small weapon has 3, 6, 12 range. If you're throwing it, the larger one 2, 4, 8. The big one 1, 2, 3. is the range. And then it's all about, hey, it does -1 for parry and throwing or fighting. And then the damage increases. So at a small weapon, strength plus D4, strength plus D6 for medium, strength plus D8 for a large weapon. So I've had this happen I did a one shot a long time ago called Flight of the Living Dead, and it was basically zombies on a plane. It's the whole idea. One of the player characters goes, "Is there a fire extinguisher around?" I went, "Yeah, sure there is." I pick it up and I swing it at the guy's head. All right, I don't call that a medium. And here we improvise weapon rule. It's very simple to apply at the table. Don't overlook it because there's an edge that eliminates that completely as well. So kind of look for those edges that your players are taking and make sure that if there's a situational rule that applies to that edge, that you're applying that situational rule because they spent time and advancement in their character specifically for that.
And don't just ignore it because no one's taken the edge yet. Otherwise, that edge just became free to all your players. If you're not applying the improvised weapon rules at the table, I have no reason to ever take that edge because I'm already getting its benefits for free. So if you want to enforce the players having to make informed, important choices about their character, don't ignore some of these rules. Now, with that said, if it's necessary for the genre you're playing in, absolutely make it a setting rule that everybody automatically gets improvisational fighter, or you ignore those penalties. I know that's one of the big things that's in almost every one of the AAA games products is that they ignore the improvised weapon penalties. But it's a huge thing that as a GM, when you do, it reduces the number of options your players have for making their character distinct and unique. And that feeds more into that whole all Savage Worlds characters are always the same, because once you get to a certain point where every GM they've ever played with doesn't require them to take quick draw to actually draw a weapon, doesn't require them to use improvisational weapon rules when actually picking up a chair and smashing it over somebody's head, those players will never take those edges. You're very slowly just crossing edges out of the book that'll never be used by your players because you've never used the whole rule that edge is designed around.
Yeah, let's just test. I just want to test something here for everybody on the panel. I'm walking at your wild card. So you're playing a GM wild card attacking a wild card hero player character. And the wild card hero player character is unarmed and you've got a club. What impact does that have on your fighting roll?
You get a +1 because they're an unarmed defender.
Right, the unarmed defender rule.
+2.
But
+2.
That's one. That's a great one to bring up, Jared, because that's one that I can honestly say I never remember that one ever.
Yeah. And the idea is because they're unarmed, all they can do is dodge. They can't kind of deflect or do anything other than, oh crap, don't hit me.
You've lost the ability to effectively parry because throwing a meaty hand up in front of a sword doesn't stop you from taking damage. It just means you took damage to your meaty, fleshy hand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great one.
Now, I'll say this, it gets written out of the rules in a lot of settings because they want two-fisted pulp action hero kind of stuff where whether you have a weapon or it doesn't matter. Yeah. And in that, I agree. So if you're playing an Indiana Jones style adventure, I don't know. I waive unarmed defender completely. I probably waive improvised weapons completely. And I probably ignore unstable platform completely because, goddamn, it's Indiana Jones.
But there again, this is why I always say Savage Worlds is not pulpy, because to capture that pulp style of a thing, you really do need to ignore some of these rules or automatically grant all your players the benefit of several edges that take that away. And this is where, that whole cinematic versus pulpy argument, I think, falls apart. Is these are people who aren't playing with all the rules, and because they're not, they don't see the impact of those in the game. and they've played that way so long, they only think of Savage Worlds as the way they've been playing it. I honestly think that's a big part of where that whole argument comes from. With that said, one thing I would like to touch on here quickly is battle maps, because I know battle maps have become very trendy in the modern age. Not just because we've gotten to a point now where the ubiquity of a Chessex map, or the ubiquity of buying a PDF and printing off another copy for tonight's game, where I don't have to worry about if I've marked up the old one or anything. That whole commonality of being able to always have battle maps at a moment's notice has made it so that we are seeing more and more use of them in games. And quite honestly, Savage Worlds does some really interesting stuff with that. Like, get completely rid of the grid system. I don't have to worry about checkers and squares and hexes and, can I go around this corner a certain way? I take out a piece of string cut exactly for, my character's pace. I lay it on the board and wrap it around the terrain, and that's where my character can get to based on where they want to walk. It's really interesting to be able to do stuff like that and not have to worry about this whole idea of, oh, well, okay, but at this corner, it takes 3 squares to go around the corner, so that's 3 inches of my movement. No, I literally just walked around a corner. That's not 3 inches of movement to walk around a corner. You're charging somebody 18 feet of movement.
Right, because they made a hard right turn.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this too. The other thing too is, and you'll notice this if you take a look at the general rule book, the core rule book. There's templates in there for medium, small, burst, and cone that you're supposed to actually pick up your token and lay that down, and that's anybody in that is caught in it. They even have transparent plexiglass style templates you can buy as well.
I have those,
and
I don't use maps and minis very often anymore.
And I'll say this: it really is kind of revolutionary. But the Fast and Furious also transfers out to if you're playing it on a battle mat, because an actual table.
I mean, Core has a sidebar that specifically tells you, it's not as easy to do without minis when you're trying to use the templates, but here's a general rule for the templates, and it tells you basically it's a roll, and then you get however many, and I don't remember the exact.
Right, there's a way to roll generally for it.
But there's a way to roll, and like a small burst template gets 1d4, and a medium burst template gets X amount, and so on. Well, there it is. So, small burst is 1d3, medium burst or cone is 2d4, and a large is 2d6.
So I know Ron Blessed has done an entire set of videos where he talked about, how to take and run Savage Worlds and Theater of the Mind and making some of those conversions. And I know we had Ron on the show, and we actually talked about that pretty extensively too, is, ways that you can kind of estimate those ranges and kind of still use all of the rules, but do it in a Theater of the Mind style. But I really do think that Savage Worlds from the top down, because of its roots in some older tabletop wargaming stuff, does some interesting stuff. Like, the cone template is quite simply not used in almost any other RPG. It's almost 100% ubiquitous among every wargaming out there, but it's not used in RPGs. And yet, I mean, all the things that you can think of that would typically use a cone template, like the flamethrower or a D&D lightning bolt, is amazing for the cone template. I mean, what took so long for that to be figured out?
Right. Well, and here's the thing too, running Theater of the Mind. So for example, Chris is absolutely right. Savage Worlds will give you a roll this many dice and it hits this many enemies as a randomizer to do it. If you're doing Theater of the Mind, you're not working on a table. But I find it very easy, Theater of the Mind, to estimate if 1 inch on the tabletop is 6 feet in the real world, and you got a pace of 5, okay, you're moving 30 feet. In a standard round. Yep. I can estimate that in a Theater of the Mind setting.
And the book actually uses it as 2 yards.
Right, same thing.
And if you really want to think in yards, because when I think of that, I use yards because I picture a football field.
Yeah. That can
And
work.
so that helps me visualize how far things are away from each other and how far people can move by thinking of it as 2 yards per square and think of a football field.
Right. And you can also get an idea of that too, because the cone template section of the book will tell you how many inches in diameter is a large, medium, or small burst template. So a small burst template, for example, is 2 inches diameter.
And while not being an exact conversion, you can swap that 2 yards to 2 meters and make all of the
sci-fi games.
Well, no, even just your metric gamers who are out there, I mean, more than half the world is using the metric system. I hate to say that, we're a little behind the times here in the United States using this, antiquated imperial system. But more than half the world, and therefore a whole fuckload of gamers out there are trying to use metrics. And here this is listing things in inches and feet and yards. It's very easy to go, oh, well, that just converts right to 2 meters. So that does make it a rather easy way to do that conversion, just so you're thinking in a set of units that make sense to your way of thinking. Right. We might be able to very quickly go, oh, well, that's a freaking, football field. But for them, they're more thinking of it, oh, that's a pitch and a half long for soccer.
Right.
I was going to say, it depends on which football you're using.
I'll say this too. One of the dangers that you run into playing theater of the mind is never making anything more than short range when it comes to range combat. Right. Because you don't think of anything more than, oh, well, it's short range. It's short range. It's short range. It's short range. So, I mean, you got to kind of keep that in mind. But yeah, it's very easy to translate that on tabletop stuff to theater of the mind if you understand what the basis of inches is in real world equivalent.
And I'm doing that right now. I'm running Deadlands Noir, and I'm really not using maps and minis. And I've got 2 players who are having a really hard time with not having maps and minis. Mm-hmm. And I'm having to re-explain things and go, no, that's not what it looks like. This is what it looks like. And so, I mean, you do have that issue as well. And I don't know a good way to get around that, because I'm almost to the point now where I'm like, well, maybe I should get maps and minis out, but I don't want to. But those 2 players are having such a difficult time.
Is it
because they're D&D players?
Okay, well, yeah, they're used to everything breaking down to a battle map and tactics, tactical movement.
Yes.
Yeah, they need to drink the Kool-Aid and embrace the savage a little bit. I mean, you can help them.
I will say, Chris, if you do decide to break down and go the maps and minis route to give into what those players want, make sure you're using ungridded maps. So
and handing them the templates.
Because as soon as you put down a map that already has all the inch squares,
that's why I don't want to use them.
They are immediately going to start following D&D movement rules and squares rather than following the way Savage Worlds handles that.
Yes.
So I would be very careful not to do that.
It constrains them. They're constrained to the square. And they don't do cool shit, and everything is static, and everything is all about the squares. And that's why I try to give good explanations of what they're seeing and where people are at and what they can hide behind. But those 2 players are just, can you explain it to me again? I'm just not seeing it.
All right.
Here's what I would recommend. It's worked well for me over the years. When a player goes, well, how far am I away from your plot appropriate distance? Tell me what you're trying to accomplish.
And I use that a lot now.
Mm-hmm. We'll figure it out. What do you want to accomplish in this scene? What are you trying to do? Okay. Yeah, that's a medium range. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there's a couple boxes you could hide behind after you take the shot, or blah 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 blah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really gonna try to keep it at theater of the mind as much as I can, and hopefully they'll just embrace it, and we'll see what happens. But I mean, the game's going really well. We're having fun, but it's just those two players are just really still struggling a little bit.
Yeah, they're having a problem living free, right?
Yeah. They don't have the picture and the squares to show them what they can and can't do and where they can move.
Well, what I love
free or die hard.
What I love is when you get people who are players that are used to that level of structure with maps and everything, and you go theater of the mind, and you go, this is a typical mechanics auto body repair shop. There's 2 bays for oil changes and lifts. The room's about just general dimensions. The room is 60 feet deep by 100 feet wide. And they start going, is there a hammer? You ask them, go, well, does it make sense for there to be a hammer in an auto body shop? Yeah. Then you don't have to ask permission and ask me if it's there. Just dictate to me. I pick up the hammer, and if I got a problem with it, I'll stop you and go, whoa, there's no hammer.
I remember in the very first time I played in one of your games, Jared, I was playing the TV reporter, and we run to the RV. And I'm sitting there and I'm froze for a minute because a bunch of deranged cultists are coming at us. And I just say, I reach into the glove compartment and pull out the air horn, and I blare it at them to do a smarts trick. And you just said, okay, give me the roll.
Yeah, that's the beauty of theater of the mind. It's like, does it make sense for it to be there? Yeah, it's reasonable. Go ahead.
It's an RV, sure.
Yeah, why not?
It's the 70s. Everybody had an air horn in the 70s.
Right, you got to scare bears away.
Right.
Well, you would have said, I take out my Afro pick and attack him with it. Yeah, right. That's exactly what you do. Wait a minute, do you have Afro pick listed on the gear sheet for your character? No, come on.
Right. Just roll with it, you know? I unleash the fury of my gold chain.
Well, I think the other really interesting thing is that when you think about how abstract Savage Worlds already is, that theater of the mind just works. And I'm seeing some comments in chat where people were talking about, it's either hand-to-hand or it's medium range, that, short range and long range really don't matter much. And I slightly disagree. The way I do the shorthand for me is, if you're indoors, it is short range or hand-to-hand. If you're outdoors in a typical city setting, you're going to be dealing with up to medium range. And if you're out in an open field or the woods or something like that, you might start to get into long range situations. And I think that's a big thing for people to remember, is also remember the technological level you're playing at. The higher the tech level, the longer the range increments get.
Right,
so
yes.
You very quickly run into the sci-fi game where everything's at short range because, God, you don't have a map big enough to put that on your table for it to be otherwise.
Right. Okay, well, let's. Is there anything else in chat about basic rules that we've been talking about that we want to address?
I got to give props to Dustin Hatchett for Live Free or D&D Hard.
All right, there you go.
Hey, Dustin.
Ruben does ask about the whole going on hold or the Joker. And I think that's enough of a thing that does come up in games that people are absolutely probably doing wrong.
All right.
We probably need to talk about it.
So let's talk about going on hold. I don't know what to do, or if you follow the GM mastering advice of the game, you do the five countdown, which I'm a big fan of. Way to go, Shane. It's your turn. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're on hold.
Like I said, the first time I ever played a game with Shaney about gave me a freaking heart attack. Because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. He started counting down. I'm like, I'm on hold.
You got to keep that energy level up. And there's nothing like causing an adrenaline rush to a gamer like putting them on a clock.
So, bam, I'm on hold.
So
it is in the rule books if you need to do that, folks. You can actually put people on hold with a countdown.
Sure, but let's talk about what hold means. You're on hold.
So, I mean, first and foremost, in most games, you have to typically identify a trigger. You have to say, I go on hold until X happens. And if X never happens, your character takes no action that round. Savage World says, nope. You declare you're on hold, and you declare when you want to come off hold. And you call for it, there's a dice roll.
Post agility.
Now, I will say this. I never require an opposed agility check for a player to go before another player when the other player agrees to it.
Right, exactly. That's what I always do. I always say, are you okay with him jumping in here and going before you? Yeah. And if that player says no, well, then
now we're going to have
why are they saying no? But
yeah, right. Once you get to that point where someone disagrees, that's where the dice come out. But yeah, if Jared goes on hold, it comes around and it's Chris's turn, and Jared has finally seen an opportunity for his character to act and says, I want to act. Unless Chris says no, Jared just goes. There's not a need for that opposed roll.
And that's a perfect
trying to interrupt the action of an NPC that it becomes more important.
And I think that's the perfect time to insert a test of will or a trick there to help that person. If you're still not sure what you want to do, kind of think of a trick or a test of wills that you could do to help Chris on his roll if Jared's going to jump in front of me, but he's still not sure what he wants to do. I think that's a really good tactic and way to do things.
So an interesting thing of this is Jared can actually wait for Chris's character to move, and then he can act. And then when Jared's done acting, Chris gets to finish his round with any actions he hasn't taken before the next character in initiative order gets to go. And vice versa. If Chris shoots, Jared can immediately speak up, take action, and then Chris gets to take any movement or additional actions he had declared. Chris declares, I'm going to shoot, and then I'm going to reload, and then I'm going to, go over here and take cover. And right after he shoots, Jared can act. And then Chris's turn completes after Jared's actions. Again, this is assuming that there was that agreement. If Chris says, no, wait your goddamn turn. Very uncharacteristic of Chris if you don't know him. But he says, no, wait your goddamn turn. He and Jared get to roll off to see if they get to, who gets to actually act first.
Right. Now, the evil.
Why do you always want to go in the middle of my turn, Jared?
Now, the evil GM dick that Dave could be can go, okay, that's fine. So Jared's now going to wait. All right. Then my NPC is going to hit Jared with an arrow before he can act and cause him to be shaken and make sure he gets no action.
Yes.
So if you get shaken while on hold, bye-bye, you lose your turn. Thanks for playing. Wait till we draw cards again because you're shaken.
Now, let's say I'm on hold because this is something he says. I'm on hold and I have a joker and I don't go until the next round. Is my joker still in play?
Okay, so here's the things I'm going to say on this. Before we get too complicated with the whole next round question, jokers, I always hear this. Every GM I've ever played with, jokers go first. No,
they don't.
Do not. Jokers go when that player wants their character to act. Full stop. Middle of somebody else's turn, doesn't matter. They auto-interrupt. That's the benefit of the Joker. This is not even a discussion at that point. Jared doesn't need Chris's permission. Jared can act in the middle of Chris's action. He can act in the middle of an NPC's action. He can act whenever the hell he wants. That's a very Jared thing to do. But yeah, no, the Joker has a very interesting aspect of it can act when it wants. A lot of people say they can automatically go at the top of the turn order and go on hold, but they're really not on hold. Technically speaking, they just act when they want to act. Now, if you get all the way to the end of a turn, everyone has acted. It doesn't matter what card you have in front of you. It can be a Joker. It can be a deuce. If your character is on hold at the end of that round, you take the card you have in front of you and turn it face down, and you remain on hold for the next entire round if you choose to, and you don't get dealt into that round. Your face down card is is what shows that you're on hold for that round, and you get to act at any point during the round just under the same rules we just talked about. You don't even get a new card. So I've seen this be a very beneficial thing. You get dealt absolute fucking dog last in the round. you can just go on hold and wait to act. Because as much as you might benefit from acting right there at the end of the round and take advantage of being able to react to everything that happened, it can also be useful to turn that into an on hold so that if the big bad draws the high initiative card the next round, you can try to interrupt to stop that.
Right. Well put, sirs. Well explained. Makes it very simple. So if you're on hold at the end, and here's I think what most people don't realize: if you're on hold at the end of the action, you don't get dealt a new card. If you're going to remain on hold. Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about the more advanced areas of Savage Worlds that just frankly people are doing wrong. I have to say you're doing it wrong. And I want to talk about dramatic tasks.
Okay.
I want to start with dramatic task. First of all, it's right there in the title. It says dramatic. So there has to be something big to win or lose on the table if you're going to start really using a dramatic task. So do yourself a favor. Don't run a dramatic class when it's anticlimactic. Like, oh, we're going to do a dramatic task to see about you guys ordering beer in a tavern. No. This is reserved for, oh, crap, we're in a plane. The guys that are running the plane sabotaged it, jumped out with the last 2 parachutes. Oh, shit. The plane's going down. What do we do? That's time for a dramatic task. Oh, cultists are bringing Cthulhu into the world through a portal, and we need to shut that shit down. Time for a dramatic task. Oh, there's a bomb on the plane, and it's got 1 minute before it detonates. That's a time for a dramatic task.
I used it for burning building, and they had to get in and save people, and they had X amount of time before it collapsed, and there was a possibility that it was going to collapse on them.
Exactly. So there needs to be something huge to win or lose on the table, generally speaking, if you're going to run a dramatic task.
And I would be careful with using it even for things like disarming the bomb, because quite frankly, if what the players are doing does not A, involve multiple tasks that they have to complete either simultaneously or in sequence, or B, require multiple people to take action, then it is not worth being a dramatic task. Make it a dice roll and move the fuck on. The whole disarming the bomb is the one we hear all the time. Is, it's this idea the 2 guys are disarming the bomb. They're trying to decide between the red wire and the blue wire. And you make it a dramatic task. You go through 4 cards, and then they draw a club. It's a complication, and the timer starts to go faster. And boom, they fail the dramatic task. Well, failing a dramatic task means the worst outcome possible happens immediately, regardless if it's the first card or the last card. But disarming the bomb doesn't need to be a dramatic task. Okay. Disarming the bomb is give me a demolitions roll to see if you disarm the bomb.
I think everybody uses that one because isn't that the example in the book?
That's Crime City, The Chase. I believe that's the one. If you play the one shot, there is a bomb and everybody tries to disarm it and you just die.
Yeah. Here's the thing. If you want to have a very dramatic disarming the bomb dramatic task, it better be a dramatic task because one of the player characters is an EOD specialist and knows about things like pouring liquid nitrogen on the bomb to slow down the detonation rate. They know about wrapping the bomb in certain materials to try to, soften the amount of damage it causes. They need to be somebody who's going to take multiple steps. If they're literally Martin Riggs, who's going to pull out a pair of wire cutters and go, the red wire or the blue wire, oh, there is no red wire, I'm cutting green. That's not a dramatic task.
I'm going to tell you this, guys. I'm going to give you a piece of information to the players out there. If you're playing Crime City, think outside the box. You're at the docks. You have to dump the bomb in the water.
Spoilers, Dustin. Jesus.
I'm just saying.
Hey, I will say this. If you're playing Crime City, you need to think about cover.
Yeah.
You do.
Take it from me.
I mean, everybody in that setting, in those 2 one-shots, the player characters are given like a bat and a revolver, and the enemies have AK-47.
You do not come prepared to that fight.
It's a bad day.
You
So
just don't.
okay, so here's the thing to remember about dramatic tasks. They have a standard static -2 penalty to every roll. Do not let the player characters make dramatic task rolls without imposing that penalty. It's a dramatic task for a reason. I'm going to say there's a standard. I'm going to say, I see Dave rolling his eyes. There's a standard. If they have bonuses from edges, great, whatever, but there's a standard. Now, I'm going to say this.
The way the book rules it is, again, like so many other things, it's not a hard and fast rule. It says the usual penalty.
Right.
For dramatic task.
Yes, most dramatic tasks should have at least a -2 modifier.
Right.
Yeah. You can have less if it's absolutely appropriate. You can absolutely have a much bigger penalty.
Right.
You could run an entire dramatic task at -4, -6, -3.
Yeah.
It all depends on how difficult what the players are trying to achieve. Don't get locked in on it's always a -2.
Right. But and also, too, make sure you're applying any situational modifiers, too. So, if they're trying to let's talk about disarming the bomb, which we said don't do. But let's say they're doing it, and they're doing it on a plane encountering turbulence. Yeah, turbulence. Then make sure that you're applying that unsteady platform rule to the roll, to the dramatic task. Now, here's the thing that most people forget. You're supposed to net 5 successes in 5 rounds or 5 turns draws of the card. Okay? You don't stop the dramatic task if you get 5 successes by the 3rd draw. You keep going because a complication can pop up that screws the pooch on your dramatic task. So here's the thing to remember. Clubs, so what happens is you draw a card. If it's anything but a club, they make their appropriate skill roll for the dramatic task. Every success and raise is worth 1 success. So when you draw a club, before you can proceed with that step in the dramatic task, something's popped up you need to deal with. Now, this may be completely unreal. It doesn't mean, okay, double down on the penalty for the skill roll you're making. That's a common mistake. Don't double down on the regular skill roll. Come up with something else. Like,
if you just double down on the penalty for the skill roll, you are a boring GM.
So using
you're doing it wrong, but you're boring.
Yes,
Your players aren't getting the level of entertainment they should be getting from that moment. And this goes back to that whole be wary of when to run a dramatic task and when not to.
Right. So, for example, we're disarming the bomb on flight 388. I'm 3 rounds in. I've got 4 successes. This is going well, and then I draw a club. Oh, crap. What happens? Oh, you know what? There's a sudden burst, and the tool that you're using slides out of your hand and starts to fall on the mechanism. Give me an agility roll to reach in and grab that bitch. And guess what happens?
Or it squirts out the bomb.
Yeah, or what happens if you don't grab that bitch, Dave? And you burn all your bennies and you don't grab that tool.
Boom.
Boom. End of dramatic task. Done. Boom. Bitches, you're dead.
I will say this. The appropriate thing to have happen in that situation is not necessarily an instantaneous detonation. The appropriate thing might be the bomb switches over, the countdown starts going more rapidly, and it can no longer be disarmed. Now what do the players do? You ratchet up the drama in the moment. It doesn't have to automatically go directly to, boom, you're dead. Now it can, and now they have to soak some damage and deal with being blown out of an airplane. You're now hurtling to the earth with 2 wounds. What do? You can see the plane debris over there in the air as it falls with you.
Now, let's say in that same dramatic task situation, I get to the 4th card and I have 8 successes. And then I draw a complication. And then I fail the complication. Guess what? I failed a dramatic task. I think that's the most overlooked part of that rule that people just don't tend to get the first time they try running it or playing it. A complication always, if you fail the complication, you fail the task. Period.
That is the key aspect of the complication. Now, depending on you as a GM, if you need a handhold to determine how bad a complication can be, my suggestion is always take a look at the same chart that's in the book for the chase, where the chase sets the severity based on the value of the club.
Right.
And you can say, like, 2 of clubs, something goes dramatically wrong. You know, that's the situation where all of a sudden the bomb is going to go off. The ace of clubs is where, okay, wow, yeah, you failed, but you still have time to, like, throw the bomb off the plane or submerge it in water, flush it down the toilet, whatever it is you're going to try to do.
Cry for mama.
Keep your head between your own legs and kiss your ass goodbye.
Give the character next to you last rites because it's been nice knowing you.
Mhm.
Start rolling up the new character.
Now, what Dave just mentioned too, I had to make sure we put a caveat and a pin in that. Advanced, that's GM pro tip.
Well, and that's again, if as a GM you have that club come up and you don't know what to do, you vapor lock on what do I throw at them. That's just a good way to judge how bad the complication should be, how hard that complication should be to overcome. You know, and you know, let's take this exact same example. You're on the plane. You've described it as being under turbulence, so everything's at a -3 already, and they draw 2 of clubs. The plane suddenly flips inverted. The pilots have lost control due to the turbulence, and they're trying to get it back under control. I need an agility check at -4 because you and the bomb are falling. You have to catch it before it hits the ceiling of the plane as you're falling.
Right.
Now I've just given you a dramatic moment. Why? Because that 2 of clubs is the worst one that comes up. And ace, the tool starts to slip out of your hand from the sweat that's formed, and you just have to grab your tool, get a secure hold on your tool before it shorts off the board.
Right. Now here's the thing too.
Both end in a horribly bad thing if you fail, but the complexity of that complication, it's very easy to set on the face value of that.
Value of the card.
Again, that's just more. That's not in the rules. That's just more if you need something to help as a gauge. I know a lot of GMs get in this thing of, well, I don't want to do anything to take away the fun of the players. That you get those GMs who feel like, well, now I'm just being an asshole GM. No, it's appropriate sometimes to make things really bad for the player characters. That's what makes it really fun for the players when they overcome them.
Right.
And sometimes you want a guide for that. That's what that can do.
Right. Now here's how you don't run a dramatic task. Okay, you don't sit down and go, okay, we're going to run a dramatic task. Okay, and I deal you a ace of diamonds. Go ahead and make your repair roll at a -2. Yay, 3 successes. Okay, now I deal you another jack of spades. Go ahead and make your... Please, for the love of fuck, come up with narrative descriptions about what each one of those phases in the draw means. And here's the thing. Each round can represent 1 minute. It can represent things happening over periods of days. It doesn't have to be dunk, 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 dunk. You could run a dramatic task over 5 sessions of a role-playing game by at one point going, oh, give me a roll for that dramatic task. You've now found the key of Van Noozler. You've managed to find it. Okay, go ahead and give me a smarts roll to blah, 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 and see how it applies. Just make... If you can't come up with something as a GM, describe to me how you're going to go about defusing this bomb. What do you do? And at some point go, great. Here's the card, make the roll. Don't just do I'm drawing a card, make a roll. Yay, 2 successes. I'm drawing a card, make the roll. Yay, 3 successes. How many successes do we have? How many card draws do we have left? Boring. That's not what the mechanic is there for.
That's a good sign that you didn't need a dramatic task and you needed to just do it with a single dice roll. If you as a GM can't find any way to make it interesting over the course of 5 card draws, or you don't feel like your players can play to that when you ask them to give you feedback as to what their character is doing, that's a moment where that needs to just be a dice roll and move on.
Yep.
So the one I would like to touch on, because I know people are just doing it fucking wrong, is mass combat. I think people are either not using it when they should or using it when they shouldn't.
All right. Take it away.
The rules themselves are pretty straightforward. You deal out a certain number of tokens at the beginning, and every single round of a mass combat can result in absolute defeat of one side or the other. You have a dice roll for how good of a leader you are. They have a dice roll for how good of a leader you are. Individual wild cards can take actions, and then you compare tokens, and in some cases, someone just auto loses. I mean, it can be that quick. You can have one round of a mass combat, and it's all over. And that represents the entirety of two armies clashing in a valley and coming to grips with each other, and then one side giving up and being routed or being completely destroyed. There's a lot of complex rules that go into it as far as like when do you roll for morale, what the penalties are. Reread that section before running one. But most important, never, ever, ever use a mass combat when the only people acting on one side or the other is a small group of wild cards.
Yep. That's a skirmish.
Supposed to represent multiple people who are members of the army that is clashing. At which point, if all you have are the 5 player characters and 10 NPCs, run it as a combat, because trust me, it's far better for your players than a mass combat would be. Every time a player decides to pick the dice up and roll it in a mass combat, they can suffer dramatic numbers of wounds. A success results in a wound in that situation. It is not a good time to put your player characters in a situation where every action they're trying to take in this combat can get their character killed and have no impact on whether or not they win or lose at the end of the round. It is not a good thing to do. Just absolutely take a step back and really think about, is there enough people in this to be a mass combat? And if not, run it as a combat, because this is where Savage Worlds absolutely shines. You can run 5 player characters against 30 NPCs. And you know what? The player characters, if those are all extras, will plow the fuck through them. You might only need 7 rounds of combat to do that. And those rounds are only going to take less than 5 minutes apiece.
Okay, so go ahead, Dustin. Read Carlin's comment.
But Dave, I'm running Hack and Dynasty Warriors. My wildcard players can totally take on masses of enemies, and it will be epic!
Yep, they absolutely can. And you can run your 5 player characters against 30 NPCs as regular combat. I guarantee it'll be epic and way more fun than it would be as a mass combat.
To be fair, if you're playing Dynasty Warriors, it kind of balances out, because like one player character in that game is like 30 cannon fodder characters.
Right.
Everybody has improved sweep, improved first strike. Everybody has like quick and level-headed. Like, that game is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the bastard cousin of the dramatic task of mass combats and talk about chases real quickly.
Ooh.
So chases are not races.
Oh, God.
But they break our faces.
Well, they can.
So you need to establish, the one thing you need to understand when you're going into a chase is you need to establish the terms of victory up front. If you make it okay, we're in let's say we're doing a Fast and Furious. I've already gotten the bank vault. I'm dragging it on a chain across the California freeways. I got to get to the Mexico border. If I get to the Mexico border with that safe, woo! I'm free. I win.
You have to describe all the other in order to get a Benny, you have to describe every other player character as family at least 5 times.
Right. And if you say you live your life a quarter mile at a time, you get 2 bennies. If you say that.
I think the part of this that really gets missed is what Jared's talking about right here is when they introduce the chase, they say, really you should set how many rounds the chase is going to last. When you set how many rounds the chase is going to last, you set the win condition for both sides.
Right.
So the chaser has 3 rounds to catch the chasee. But if they attack them and kill them, they win. And if at the end of 3 rounds, the chasee hasn't accomplished X, the chaser has cornered them. For the chasee, you say, you have 3 rounds to accomplish X. Regardless of what that is, you say this is what you need to do in those 3 rounds, or you will be run into a corner and have to fight your way out. At the end of the chase, there's a definitive thing you have to have accomplished or not accomplished. Otherwise, what you really end up with is this never-ending chase combat scene. Because if there's not a definitive, this is what you did and got away, or this is what you did and got caught, then you're not running a chase. You're really just running an extended mobile combat.
Yep. So let's take because I think when you're talking about chases in Savage Worlds, because of the abstract, it helps to think of that as something from popular media that a lot of people are familiar with. Let's talk about the freeway chase in the second Matrix movie, where Trinity has to get the keymaker to safety off the freeway, and they're being chased onto the freeway by agents. Okay, so the agents are chasing. They're trying to get the keymaker. That's their goal. Capture the keymaker. Trinity is trying to make sure they don't capture the keymaker and she doesn't get dead or they don't get dead in the process. So understand that because Trinity's on a motorcycle, she gets an advantage for maneuverability and speed essentially in the freeway chase. So when she makes her driving rolls, her maneuver roll, quote unquote, driving in that situation, she's going to do it at a bonus. She's going to add a positive bonus to it when she makes those rolls. Now, the thing is, with the chase, whoever has the highest card has advantage in that chase. It can take action on anyone with a lower card. That's the key thing to remember. So if the agents end up getting advantage, they draw their pistols and shoot. Or, oh, we have advantage, we're going to into a closer car. We're going to, whatever that is, you figure out what abstracted that means in that chase. Now, if Trinity gets advantages, she's probably not going to fire weapons at agents, but she's going to do this kind of thing where she goes pivot up on the front of the bike, spins, and lays down auto fire, suppressive fire across the agents. That is known as a force maneuver. It's essentially a trick or test of wills combat mechanic in the game, meant to cause them to have to make a driving roll, not to wreck or be out of the chase.
And so, in most cases, what it does is actually, if she succeeds, they take a penalty the next round when they're rolling to see how many cards they get to draw to try to be the person with advantage. So there again, there's a definitive mechanical effect that it has on the chase to do that narrative thing. And that's that abstraction layer that, again, is really hard to understand and makes the chase probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of the game.
Right. Because people also look at it, too, when complications arise, right? They also look at it like, well, wait a minute. How I was at short range last round, and now I'm at long range? And
a round ago.
Right. Because this is happening all in real time, different areas throughout the chase, what you're narrating.
Right. You really have to really abstract it. I mean, I've brought this up before when we've talked about chases, and I'll get this link to Jared to throw into the show notes. But there is
that one from Clint, the boat.
Yeah, he took a chase from the Eye of Coquado, which is basically one of their one of their big, one of their starter pulp modules. Yeah, and he did he did an entire example using it, and it's excellent.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things he just kind of does in that's amazing that gets lost is you get locked into the terminology used in that chase chart where it says if you've got a face card, you're at short range. If you've got this card, you're at medium range, or you got this card, you're at long range. And he changes that more to a situational modifier, like the boat has rocked up on one side, so you're at a -2 or a -4 because there's a big ass branch that's in the way and stuff like that. Like, it's not actually that you've fallen back to long range, it's that your cumulative penalty for the situation is the same as a long range penalty, whether you actually have fallen to long range. Because if you stop and think about this, the people in a chase might have different weapons. You might have a sword versus another guy who's got an Uzi, and short range for both of you still inflicts a short range penalty based on that chart, even though short range for the sword is literally I can touch you, and short range for the Uzi might be 10 inches. I'd have to look at the book to really look that up. Don't quote me.
Drive me closer.
Whereas, like, long range for the sword is still, I can touch you. And long range for the Uzi is, again, several inches. So you remember that these things are not meant to be a one-to-one, exactly what they say. They're there more as an actual kind of situational modifier. They're not always meant to be that. And here's the thing. The guy with the sword can choose not to use his sword, but instead do the force maneuver that Jared was talking about, and he still suffers that same penalty to his action because his action is taking place under the situation of that modifier. It's a big part of that all kind of wraps into that. I really do think that I'm hoping in Black they restructure the language on that and take out this whole idea of ranges and just make it a situational modifier. Maybe requiring a face card to be able to act in melee, but everything else you can act with any weapon. But absolutely, it's not something where you need to go, oh, well, this is long range, so suddenly my character is 30 inches back because I'm using a long rifle and it tells me I'm at long range. And next round, I'm at point blank range, so I moved right back up to him and try to find a way to describe how that character moved 30 inches. Now, the other thing you remember in a chase is sometimes that result is because they failed to move as far as they could have. The leader of the chase maybe ran into an obstacle that slowed them way down, and that's why you were suddenly able to catch up and be in such an advantageous situation. That's a great reason for why they said you can use the never-ending chase as a way to do dogfights. Again, it does require that extra layer of abstraction, that extra layer of narrative muscle on the GM's part, but it is actually a great mechanic for it.
Right, and you could ask, and the thing too is you could ask the player, what do you do that gives you that advantage? Narrate that for me. What did you do in this chase just then that gave you that advantage card? And I think when you put it back on the player, we had this in the Mafia game that Dave and I were running at one point. They were trying to get away from a corrupt police inspector. And they're running around in a muscle car. He's chasing a Lincoln Navigator, or not a Lincoln Navigator, a Cadillac. And they're going down city streets in basically Brooklyn. And he's like, I cut through the park. I just go up on the run. I cut through the park. Excellent. Did it make a difference in what cards we were playing? No, but it added to the story of the chase in much the same way we were talking about the dramatic task. Don't just draw cards and roll dice. Narrate. Wait, okay, so you come around the corner. What do? I'm going to go the wrong way up a one-way street. Okay, give me your driving roll at a negative because you're dodging through. He's trying to chase you. Oh, he doesn't do as well. Now he's got an obstacle because a complication came up. So kind of embrace the narrative on that. You have to think of that in narrative terms and don't think of it necessarily as second 1, second 2, second 3, second 4. There could be 3 minutes between a chase round in real time where you've gone down city surface streets, back alleys, and now you're on a dirt road and you think, woo, okay, we're good. And the next thing, helicopter is now picking up the chase. And you don't have to keep it the same exact combatants either. If this is a Thelma and Louise situation and you're being chased by police, they've also got air support, county, maybe the military's involved, different members of the party who are chasing you could be different units that are popping up.
Stop and think about like the big chase scene in Blues Brothers, where every card draw results in another big pileup of the Chicago PD on the highway, but there's another card draw for the next, station of state troopers up the road who are going to, pull the same type of stuff.
Right.
Stop and think about these chases as long form extended periods of time, and that's when they can become a lot more fun rather than individual 6-second rounds between you and a specific set of combatants.
Right. Think of it more as a montage.
Too, but the power of abstraction is the greatest tool you have. Learn to wield it just as well as you learn to manage it from the way it's written in the book to be abstract. Learn to wield that as a tool as a GM.
Right. And just remember, you're doing a chase montage sequence. You're not doing a vehicular combat. If you want to do a vehicular combat, there's rules for that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to do Mad Max and you want it to be turn by turn, vehicle this against vehicle that, and people shooting crossbows at each other from the back seat of the vehicle, that's a vehicular combat. If you want
may
this
not like those rules, but they do exist.
Right. And it becomes a tabletop war game of cars. If that's what you're going for, then maybe that's the rules you need to use. Understand, if you're doing a chase, you're doing a chase movie montage, and there's a lot of dead space in between, cutaways, and a lot of things are happening at once, and not necessarily in chronological linear order either. So, all right. I think we've killed it. I think we've really hit the major basic rules.
I think there's one we didn't touch on, but we've touched on it so much recently that I don't think we need to go into social conflicts today.
I agree.
Really kind of beat that horse to glue in other shows recently. Though,
go back and check
around to it someday in the future.
Yeah, go back and check the archive within even this season. I think we've had a conversation one or more than once about different ways to adapt social conflicts. Okay, so on that note, until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, Dave, and Dustin saying keep rolling and stay savage.